On the night of February 19, 2026, the atmosphere inside the Milan arena wasn't loud. It was suffocatingly tense. We were deep into the final flight of the women's free skate. Lenses zoomed in, coaches fell silent, and the moment Alysa Liu struck her final pose, a heartbeat of stillness hung in the air before the scores flashed. Gold medal. But the origin of this moment wasn't Italy, nor was it Oakland. The true beginning dates back decades, to a tiny mountain hamlet in Sichuan province, right in the middle of the 1960s. Imagine unpaved paths, zero electricity, and a single household bustling with 6 kids. Among them was a boy, Alysa Liu. This isn't just color for the story, it establishes the sheer magnitude of the journey from that starting line to the finish. Alysa recalls a childhood where hitting the books meant chasing whatever scrap of light he could find. His dad was a civil servant, his mom worked the land. Despite the rigid, small-town tradition, he broke out, stacked up degrees, and entered Chinese academia just as the political winds started shifting. And then, 1989 hit. Anyone familiar with Beijing back then recalls the fever-pitched students rallying, demanding change, a cocktail of optimism and danger. Alysa stood in those crowds. No guesswork there. He has gone on record about it plenty of times. Once the hammer dropped, the writing was on the wall. Staying meant suffering. So he bolted for California. Fresh soil, different rules, and a law degree that was suddenly worthless paper. With rough English, he had to scrape his way up from square one. Here is the part that gets glossed over. Starting over sounds noble in a bio, but living through it is a different beast entirely. It involves sitting in classrooms again, retaking the bar, and scrapping against rivals 10 years your junior who never had to run for their lives. Alysa crushed American law school and eventually hung his own shingle as an immigration attorney. Immigration law, not exactly lyrical but purely pragmatic, guiding others through a maze you barely survived yourself. Zero movie magic here. Just a slow grind of filings, client meetings, endless nights, and punishing Bay Area rent checks. Then, at 40, he took a path most would swerve to avoid. Single but desperate to be a dad. Lacking a partner or a conventional route, he engineered his own way. Via donors and surrogates, he welcomed 5 children into the world. Alysa arrived first, followed by Selena, and then the triplets Julia, Justin, Joshua, with his mom flying in from China to help wrangle the chaos. For a stretch, all 7 of them crammed into a single-bedroom flat in the Bay. 1 room, 3 bunk beds. Down the road, Alysa confessed she actually missed those days. Tight quarters, sure, but fun and full of love. Siblings scrambling over one another in the dark. Hardly the backstory viewers imagined during Olympic highlights, no private ice sheets out back. No elite training centers, just constant noise and a dad juggling legal briefs with juice boxes. At 5, Alysa hauled Alysa to the Oakland Ice Center, partially to burn off her manic energy, and partially because he was a huge Michelle Kwan fan. Sounds like a whim, but whims have a funny way of becoming fate. Group classes morphed into private instruction in a blink. Instructors immediately clocked her spin velocity and her total lack of fear. By 10, she had snatched a national intermediate title. By 12, she was nailing clean triple axels in contests. Her rise seemed inevitable, but peel back the layers. High-level American figure skating is anything but a hobby. It is a financial black hole. Ice rental, top-tier coaching, flights, glittery outfits. Reports suggest Alysa poured about $150,000 annually into her dream at the peak. That kind of cash doesn't appear without bleeding somewhere else. Meanwhile, a darker subplot was unfolding behind the scenes. The feds later exposed that operatives linked to Beijing tried to squeeze Alysa regarding his past activism, even putting his daughter in their crosshairs. Legal filings hit the press. News alerts flashed. The timing was hardly a coincidence. When your kid is skating for the Stars and Stripes at the Olympics, the spotlight gets blinding. Narratives usually boil this down to good guys versus bad guys right here. Real life is messier. It involves legal briefs, intimidation, and quiet security talks all happening while a teen works on her rotation. If you are still watching, you know this goes deeper than gold medals. It is about the bizarre sequence of decisions that construct a stage invisible to the TV cameras. If you dig this kind of storytelling steady, granular, zero hype, think about hitting subscribe. Not because it is the hot thing to do, but because we are about the long game here, not viral snippets. Flash forward to Milan, February 2026. Alysa is in the bleachers with his other 4 kids. Far from a mountain village, far from a cramped flat, he is in the Olympic Coliseum. The chasm between those 2 worlds is where this tale actually starts. That apartment was tiny. One room, killer rent, 5 kids, a grandmother, and a father grinding out a law career, client by client. 3 bunk beds crammed into a single room creates a vivid image, one that screams logistical survival rather than future Olympic glory. Imagine laundry piles reaching for the ceiling, schoolwork sprawling across the dining table, and a constant chorus of demands. Alysa looks back on that era with a certain warmth, calling it fun, which really just proves how nostalgia softens the edges of memory. Kids don't care about square footage. They measure life in proximity, volume, and presence. And Arthur? He was always present. He was shuttling her to the Oakland Ice Center at 5 years old dawn patrols, post-school grinds, and lost weekends. Instructors instantly clocked her natural velocity and an equilibrium that defied physics. That's when Laura Leetsky stepped onto the scene. Group lessons evaporated, replaced by one-on-one coaching. But let's kill the fairy tale right here. Elite skating is less about gifts and more about the grind. It demands cash. It demands order. Just stepping onto the ice burns through thousands a month before you even factor in the choreographer. Throw in dry land conditioning and custom boots that disintegrate under the sheer violence of triple jumps. By the time Alysa hit the serious circuit, Arthur was allegedly bleeding 6 figures a year just to keep the machine running. We're talking upwards of $150,000 during the intense seasons of financial gravitational shift that most families couldn't survive. While peers dabbled in weekly piano lessons or soccer practice, Alysa was practically living on the ice before she hit puberty. Dawn practices, afternoon drills, and homework squeezed in at her dad's office in the gaps between his client calls. She briefly walked the halls of the Oakland School for the Arts, but as her itinerary expanded, traditional schooling gave way to home study. She grabbed her diploma at 15, a feat usually glossed over as simply accelerated learning. In reality, it meant 0 free afternoons and erased weekends. Existence shrank down to steel blades and rigid schedules. 12 years old, and she nailed a flawless triple axel in a meet. That's not a stat. For a girl that age, it launches you into the stratosphere. By 13, she snatched the U.S. Senior National crown, standing atop a podium while barely a teenager, towering over rivals years her senior. Stats are updated silently in back rooms, but within the Federation's walls, the pressure gauge spikes immediately. U.S. Women's figure skating was desperate for a new savior. The press anointed her the next big thing. Microphones appeared. Lenses focused. It starts as a low hum. It's not a heavy burden initially. It's an atmospheric shift. The inquiries get pointed. A single slip-up becomes viral content. Grown-ups start tossing around heavy terms like legacy to a junior high kid. Through all this, Arthur remained the architect of her training regimen. He managed the calendar, the flights, the checkbook. His philosophy was simple. If it matters, you go all in. He didn't mince words. If you're in, you do it right. But there's a shadow over this story. Arthur wasn't merely a financier dad. He was a notorious activist. The ghosts of 1989 never really left. Actually, as Alysa climbed the global rankings, that past came into sharper focus. Court documents later revealed specific efforts linked to Chinese authorities to squeeze or threaten him. We're talking legal records, not gossip. The message was unmistakable. They could get to you through your blood. It didn't tank her career in the open, but it hummed ominously behind the scenes. Picture being 15, grinding every day on the world stage, while aware that powerful adults are playing geopolitical chess with your surname. That adds a grit you don't find in your average wonderkin tale. To the spectator, however, it appeared as nothing but smooth, upward trajectories, championships, Grand Prix hardware, and buzz about quads and triple axles. She was breaking droughts for American women that had lasted for ages. Her brand was high-stakes technicality. The masses just saw the viral clips. They missed the endless loops, the exhaustion, and the crushing of typical teenage doubt into a suffocating timeline. Down the line, Alysa would call her upbringing highly irregular. No bitterness, just cold, hard facts. Start at 5, and the line between choice and destiny blurs. That one realization speaks louder than 100 media briefs. The apartment didn't scream chaos. It screamed order, focus, and shelter, but the intensity was palpable. Arthur worshipped at the altars of hard work and discipline, supporting his girl with 0 reservations. A subtle question starts to bubble up. When you win this young, whose victory is it? Is it for the kid, the parent, or the machine craving a hero? Everyone bought the easy story back then. The Prodigy, the savior of U.S. ice. But stories have a way of ironing out the messy wrinkles. If you recall the dry spells pre-2002, you get why the powers that be push so hard when they smell talent. Skating isn't merely dance. It's cash flow, TV deals, and national pride all accelerating while Alysa was still waiting on her learner's permit. Come Chapter 3, the screws turn. Walking away at 16 in Beijing didn't feel like the victory lap everyone imagined. If this narrative seems complex rather than loud, well, that is exactly the point. Stick with me here. By the start of 2022, Alysa Liu had evolved past being just another hopeful on the ice. She was 16, an Olympian, and headed to Beijing. The poetic irony of that specific destination wasn't lost on anybody with a pulse. Her father had fled the country back in 1989. Decades later, his daughter was returning to that same soil, zip-up jacket emblazoned with Team USA. That backstory alone was heavy. Yet, on the surface, everyone kept obsessing over program components, edge calls, and slow-motion replays of her jumps. But right around then, the plot thickened. Federal prosecutors in the United States cracked open a case regarding agents trying to stalk or intimidate Arthur Liu due to his political activism. Court papers suggested a concerted effort, linked to overseas authorities, to squeeze him from the shadows. The timing was beyond awkward. Usually, this is the part where the movie script either goes over the top or sweeps everything under the rug. The reality was much simpler. Briefings on safety were held. Everyone was on high alert. Through it all, Alysa just kept lacing up her skates and putting in the work. That February in Beijing, she threw down a solid performance while the world watched her every move. It wasn't flawless, but she held it together beautifully. She capped it off with a bronze medal at the World Championships later that spring in Montpellier. By every metric, that season was a triumph. Then she pulled the plug, retired at 16. No big press tour, just a social media update that felt strangely peaceful. She explained she'd been at it since age 5, 11 years of grinding, and she was done. She wanted to see what the world looked like, outside of a frozen oval. People immediately chose sides. You had shock, heartbreak, cheering, and total bafflement. Top-tier contenders just don't quit at their peak, especially not when they have that kind of technical firepower. Everyone settled on burnout as the reason. It was the logical conclusion. A lifetime of practice, headlines, geopolitical drama, jet lag, and crushing expectations. Sure, but labels like that tend to smooth over the rough edges. The things she said once the dust settled were far more compelling. She didn't describe a breakdown. She talked about breathing room, the chance to just exist without a countdown clock ticking toward the next competition. So, she went out and did exactly that. She traveled, went skiing, which is kind of funny for someone raised on skates, and started studying psychology at UCLA. She even trekked up to Everest Base Camp, sitting at over 17,000 feet. No cameras, no sponsors, just because she wanted to see if she could. But there is a specific nuance during this hiatus that people usually gloss over. When you strip away the regimen that ruled your life since kindergarten, you get vertigo. The quiet gets deafening. Yet, she wasn't online posting tearful diaries. She wasn't plotting a return. She just ghosted the sport. Sometimes saying nothing hits harder than a microphone drop. While she was away for those 2 years, the American women's program was desperately trying to find its footing. That gold medal dry spell dating back to 2002 wasn't budging. A revolving door of new talent kept spinning through the ranks. Experts whispered about returns, but the consensus was clear. The kid star burned bright, burned out, and vanished. That narrative fits, but it misses the point. When she finally stepped back onto the ice in 2024, the vibe had shifted. It was personal now. She was picking her tracks, driving the choreography, and building routines that actually felt authentic to her. Reports surfaced that she asked her dad to ease up on the daily management, not to leave, just to give her some air. Arthur later confessed that it hurt a bit. Honestly, who wouldn't feel that? When you've poured your wallet and soul into something for a decade, letting go of the reins doesn't come naturally. But he honored her wish. That choice might just be the linchpin of this whole saga. Outsiders called it growing up, a healthier boundary. That explains the logistics, but not the soul of it. The real transformation was happening inside. She wasn't competing to live up to the future star label anymore. She was there because she wanted to rediscover the joy of it. She didn't come out swinging with gold medals immediately. Nobody expected her to sweep the podiums. Before the 2025 World Championships in Boston, she actually told reporters she'd be thrilled just to crack the top 10. That isn't the kind of thing you say to build hype. And then, she went out and won the whole thing. She became the first American woman to claim that crown in almost 20 years. That victory shifted the conversation, first in a whisper, and then in a roar. As the 2026 season loomed, the headline changed. She wasn't the prodigy anymore. It became about redemption. A comeback story. Those words are tidy, but real life is messy. Going into Milan, she was 20, no longer the kid. Not quite a veteran carrying a history of political drama, instant fame, an early exit, and a return designed entirely by her. When those short program marks flashed on the board, you could feel the momentum turning into an avalanche. Everything hinged on the final long program. Perched in the stands were Arthur and the siblings who once bunked together in a single bedroom, their family's odyssey stretching from Sichuan to Beijing and eventually landing in Milan had taken turns that defied all expectations. February 19th, 2026. The women's free skate in Milan stood as the final threshold between Alysa Liu and etching her name in history. This wasn't some vague concept, but a concrete milestone. American women hadn't captured Olympic gold in the singles category since 2002. 24 years. An entire generation of skaters had spent their careers overshadowed by that void. That drought had nothing to do with her, yet the pressure loomed large. That evening, the arena crackled with a palpable, rigid energy. It wasn't mayhem, it was surgical. Every single landing was make or break, every blade edge scrutinized. You could witness the tension in the way coaches gripped their seats the moment the music struck up. Her performance wasn't a whirlwind of panic. It was deliberate and poised, a flawless opening. Each jumping pass was anchored in certainty, the rotations tight and secure. Midway through, every skater hits a tipping point, either the muscles lock in fear or they simply flow. She chose to flow. If you knew the signs, it was plain as day. Her shoulders softened, and the tempo of her movement found its breath. Upon sticking that final jump and transitioning into the closing sequence, she didn't rush with explosive energy. Instead, it was tempered and sophisticated, the type of artistry rarely glimpsed in a skater once branded as the next big sensation at the age of 13. A few agonizing seconds ticked by before the scores flashed. Gold. While the crowd erupted, my eyes were glued to that tiny window on the screen. There sat her father, huddled with her siblings, the same family who'd once squeezed into a single bedroom, now witnessing their own standing on the Olympic podium. That snapshot needs no explanation. It speaks volumes on its own. By the following morning, the media had already distilled the story into a simple arc. The tale of a burnt-out prodigy who walked away, only to return with newfound strength. Redemption. It was a headline writer's dream. That angle captures the surface, but it misses the true magnitude of the journey. A rural Sichuan village in the 1960s, Beijing in 1989, harrowing immigration hearings in California, a cramped Bay Area apartment pre-dawn, rink hours, legal battles tangled in global scrutiny, a 16-year-old deciding to quit, and a 20-year-old choosing to return. These aren't fables. They are hard, recorded truths. A series of small, calculated choices stacked one by one. But there is something else that deserves your attention. During her interviews, she didn't sound like someone out to settle a score or fulfill a prophecy. Instead, she focused on living in the moment, finding joy in her performance, and expressing gratitude for the opportunity. That change in tone is significant. In her earlier years, the conversation was dominated by technical stats. Triple axels, quad attempts, youngest record breaker, first to do this accolades. In Milan, the language shifted to empowerment, serenity, and self-possession. That doesn't wash away the price she paid to get there. It simply puts it in a new light. For his part, Arthur never positioned himself as the puppet master crafting a champion. Whenever asked about his role, he consistently described it as doing whatever was required, funding, shielding, and stepping away when the time was right. There is a vast distinction between forcing a path and simply walking beside someone as they travel it. Critics often argue over whether high-stakes pressure builds unbreakable grit or simply breaks a person's spirit. The reality is that both scenarios are possible. The world loves a simple, neat answer, but life rarely offers one. In this instance, the initial framework didn't ruin her, but it did need recalibrating. She carved out space a hiatus at 16 that the competitive skating machine usually forbids. That choice might be the least exciting plot point, yet without it, the outcome in Milan likely would have been entirely different. The moment she claimed her gold medal on the podium, that iconic snapshot went viral. But medals are merely the finish line. They fail to reveal the intricate chain of events that actually forged the victory. It is tempting to claim this as proof that sacrifice equals success, or that stepping away ensures freedom, or that returning automatically means a triumphant comeback. That is by no means a universal law. What it truly demonstrates is how one family navigated the treacherous waters of immigration, fame, and immense pressure, finally converging on a single night in Italy when the stars aligned. There is one lingering image that sticks with me far more than the gold medal. Once the ceremony wrapped and the cameras turned away from the ice, there was footage of her simply cracking up with her siblings. It wasn't a historic moment, it was just life. It felt eerily familiar, reminiscent of those years in that cramped apartment, full of noise and genuine closeness. Only the scale of the world had shifted. The dynamic between them had not. If you followed this entire series, you know that this gold medal was forged long before she ever set foot on the ice. It was crafted through a series of quiet, gradual choices that never made the front page. Stories of this nature defy simple labels. Neither a fairy tale prodigy, nor a tragic victim, nor a miraculous anomaly, just deeply humanly complex. If you appreciate in-depth storytelling that refuses to take shortcuts, then you are in the right place. And if this episode offered you a fresh perspective, please think about hitting subscribe so we can continue peeling back the layers on stories that warrant our attention. I'm interested in your take. Do you believe her decision to step away at 16 was the secret to that gold medal? Or was she destined to reach that summit regardless? Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. Some adventures begin with a step. Ours began with a piece of metal. The origin story takes place in a tiny village living in total darkness.